Hello, welcome to the Be Nice podcast, where we will dive into conversations that help us recognize, understand, and take action when it comes to mental health and suicide prevention. I'm Christy Buck, your host. The Be Nice action plan is simple. You take the word nice and you break it into 4 simple steps. Notice, invite, challenge, and empower. 4 steps that can change lives. Together, we're going to share real life stories, insights, and tools to break down the stigma around mental health and inspire communities. Stigma being the number one barrier to people seeking help and treatment. Our guest this episode is Derek. Derek, a mental health advocate and my coworker. We'll hear more about his story later. We're also going to go over the myth in this episode. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. Visit our website at benice.org and follow the Mental Health Foundation of West Michigan on social media at the MHF on Facebook and benice.mi for our Instagram account. Before we dive in, please note that today's episode, yes, it covers, and we're going to discuss suicide. Take care of yourself when you're listening. And remember, if you or someone needs help or support at any time, utilize the crisis text line, 741-741, text NICE, and also to have a conversation, call 988. Today's mental health myth that we're going to bust. Mental health challenges are a sign of personal weakness and a character flaw that people can snap out of it. Let's explore why this isn't true. Some of the facts are that mental illnesses are chemical imbalances in the brain. No need to get all scientific, but that's just the fact. We have certain chemicals in our brain that help us to feel good. And then there's the fact that sometimes these can be depleted and potentially maybe the wiring can go awry in our brains. When I see signs and symptoms, that's notice. I'm going to reach out and get help and assistance. Another fact is depression is one of the leading causes of disability. When someone has untreated mental illnesses, mental health disorders, it will indeed affect going to work, going to school, carrying out daily activities, and ultimately it will mar my ability to engage in satisfying relationships. Those 3 things, when they are affected, that means that potentially the ability that I had now is the disability. Mental illnesses left untreated, mild can turn to moderate, moderate can turn to severe. So we know a fact is that treatment earlier in the illness means better hopes for recovery. Suicide is a leading cause of death in the United States. In fact, it was the second leading cause of death amongst people ages 10 to 24 years old. In 2020, suicide accounted for loss of nearly 46,000 American lives, nearly double the lives that we lose to homicide. What can we do? We can begin by busting the myths. Remember, the number one reason people don't seek help and treatment is because of stigma. Let's eradicate it. Let's become educated. So here we are today. Joining me on my episode, I'm so excited to introduce Derek. Derek Schaedig joined the foundation in 2021. Derek and I go back and we have a lot of fun memories together. One of them being how we met, and that was the fact that my husband found Derek via an article that was published on social media. My husband immediately said, Christy, you got to find this guy. So I set off. I stalked him a little bit on Facebook, but not a whole lot, other than I did send him a message. Little did I know that rarely Derek turns to social media to read messages. So about a month later, he connects with me and I said, oh my God, I love your story. Will you potentially consider helping the Mental Health Foundation out with a project? So there we are. Derek came on board to help us with an amazing project that was with the Michigan High School Athletic Association. He was a student at Harvard at the time, which I want Derek to tell a little bit more about that story. And he can even get into the amazing details of the trials, tribulations, and then ultimately some of the travels that we did together at the Mental Health Foundation of West Michigan. So joining me here today is a kid that looks a lot like my own son, weirdly so, Derek Schaedig. Derek, welcome to the episode, and I'm excited for you to share with our listeners today your journey, some of the challenges that you had, and then ultimately, being that you know the action plan, tie it in.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. That was a pretty great intro, I gotta say. One of the first times I met Christy, I think it was her sister shouted D, which is referencing her son. So yes, definitely that lookalike for her son, but I'm excited to be here.
So, Derek, along your journey, we talked a lot, and you come to the foundation because not only were you a psychology major at Harvard, you were part of the Crimson, which is their way of communicating with students via their newspaper. Could you share a little bit about that journey that started your journey towards coming to the Mental Health Foundation?
Yeah, for sure. Mental health hadn't really impacted my life in a major way when I was growing up. It wasn't something I was talked about a lot in my community, in my hockey teams, in school even. And I remember one of the first times that my life really was shifted and altered in a way and was affected by mental health came in the couple of years I graduated after high school. And in those couple of years after high school, my high school of Chelsea, which was not a very big student body. I think it was around 700 or 800 kids. In a span of 3 years, we lost 3 students to suicide. And one of those students was actually a student athlete. He was a member of the men's ice hockey program that I was a part of. And I just remember thinking at the time that it was really hard for me to understand how someone could be in so much pain and what would lead to someone taking their own life. And to be honest, I didn't really want to understand. It sounded like it would be so much pain and so much anger and frustration and sadness built up inside, and I didn't really want to dive deeper into that mental health challenges that they were facing. So I just kind of went about my life. I took a couple of gap years to play hockey before I committed and ended up going off to play hockey for Harvard University. And when I was there, that's when mental health really started to impact my life as an individual. Harvard is a pretty incredible place. There's a lot of really, really smart kids there. A lot of amazing professors. It's a great city. Boston, great city to go to college in. But I also found it to be really challenging. You know, the stressors that come along with Harvard were plenty. I felt like when I went to the classroom, it was really competitive and really hard for me to excel like I had before. And then when I would go work for hours and hours and hours on my craft playing hockey at the rink, all of a sudden I was relegated to a third string goalie, which is the first time in my life I've ever not been the starting goalie. So it was really challenging. I also had some physical injuries going on and some other stressors that led to me being diagnosed with bipolar 2 disorder, which was my first experience with mental health challenges being so severe that it led to a mental illness. And as a result of that, I started to tell my story to different student athletes on campus. And two pretty incredible things happened. One, I started to feel more empowered with my own mental health when I noticed those changes in myself and invited myself to a conversation with other people. But it also started to show me the stigma that existed. Like all these student athletes that I knew on campus were struggling also, but no one was talking about it. So I wanted to try to do something to break down that stigma a little bit. And I decided to write, which I was already writing for the Crimson, the student newspaper at Harvard. I decided to write an article about my mental health journey, which led to my bipolar 2 diagnosis and ultimately me taking a year off of hockey and school to be able to work on my mental health and get better and get treatment, which I ended up doing. And it was really successful. And during that time, that is when Christy's husband, Tim, found that article online and invited me to be in a video to educate coaches in Michigan about signs and symptoms of mental health challenges, how to notice them, how to invite themselves to a conversation with their athletes, how to challenge stigma, challenge them to access resources, and ultimately how to empower their student athletes to be resilient every day.
It amazes me that after your diagnosis, it sounds like to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it was almost a relief to find out what was happening. And I think oftentimes for some people, the diagnosis sometimes makes people turn away. And because of that embarrassment and shame. Were you ever embarrassed and ashamed at the onset when you first received that diagnosis? Tell us more. Enlighten the folks that are listening today.
Yeah, I had mixed reactions to getting a diagnosis. So my first diagnosis actually came in the end of my freshman year. I was diagnosed with depression, major depressive disorder. Um, and through a lot more investigating by my therapist and psychiatrist, they ultimately re-diagnosed me with bipolar 2 disorder. And with my first diagnosis of depression, I definitely didn't want to tell anyone. I felt like I had to be this perfect student, perfect athlete, perfect person, and not show that I was struggling with anything. So I remember, I had a pretty busy schedule as a student athlete, and I would have to go to my therapy appointments or psychiatrist appointments. And I remember not telling my friends what I was doing. Like I would just say I was going to a doctor's appointment, but being too ashamed and feeling that stigma inside that, I shouldn't tell someone that I'm struggling with my mental health. Um, and after I got that first diagnosis of depression, I started to continue to have ups and downs until I got that diagnosis of bipolar 2 disorder. And I remember when I received that diagnosis, that's when it was really that relief that Christy's mentioning of, wow, like there's a word for what is going on inside of me. Like someone else can understand. There's been people out there who struggle with similar things. But the reason that it was a relief, besides that someone else could understand, at least to some extent, what I was going through, was that there was a treatment. There was treatment plan out there that ultimately led me to being able to be here today, to be a mental health advocate and talk about my story.
And I know part of your story, and I know this because you and I have presented multiple times together, and it's been amazing for me to work beside you. You did tell your story of where you actually did have thoughts of suicide. Was this before the diagnosis? Was this when it really was the ultimate signal to you that reaching out and get help was needed and necessary?
Yeah, one of the most important things that I like to tell people who are facing a mental health challenge or mental illness is that sometimes you can feel like you're taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but ultimately we know that treatment and healing isn't always linear. But if we're always trying to strive to get back to that healthy space that we know we can get to, I think that's really important. So the instance where kind of it all came culminating to a point was after my diagnosis of depression and bipolar 2 disorder. So I was already working on getting better. But like I said, it's not always a super linear path. So I will never forget this night. Absolutely changed my life. I was in my dorm room, and this was after the season had ended. So the hockey season had ended. So I didn't have a lot pulling me out of bed to get to the rink, and class I could get away with skipping with every now and then. So I had skipped class for like the 3rd or 4th day in a row. And I was sitting in my dorm room, and I just knew that I had to get away. Like I had no idea what I was going to do, where I was going to go. I just knew that I couldn't be in that room anymore. So I did. I left my dorm room and I sprinted along the Charles River, which is like the main river on campus at Harvard. And I sprinted as long and as far as I could. And I ended up on this bench, a long way away from campus. And on this bench, I just let it all out. I started crying, and I started talking about how challenging things had been. My parents were reaching out. They were trying to get me help. They wanted me to talk on the phone with them. I was texting them, telling them I was really struggling, that I was having these thoughts that I was scared of. Like I was having these thoughts that I didn't want to be here anymore. And I knew that, that's not what I want for myself. Like I want to be healthy. I want to be the best person I could be. but I was just in so much pain and I was so confused and scared for so long that it didn't seem like there was a way out. I didn't feel like I had hope. I felt helpless. I felt worthless. Um, but thankfully, my parents, without even knowing it, used the action plan that we're talking about today: notice, invite, challenge, empower. So they've noticed these things that were going on for a really long time. They noticed the warning signs of suicide, that I was saying that I felt like there was no way out, like there was no hope, I couldn't get better. They invited themselves to a conversation with me. They got on the phone. They called me a bunch of times. Eventually, I picked up, and they connected me right then with the crisis lifeline, who connected me with the campus local resources for these kind of instances, the crisis intervention team. And they helped stabilize me. They got me to the hospital, and they helped me get back on track, get back to a plan that would work best for me. That was what ended up leading to that year off of hockey in school. But ultimately, that moment is really what changed my life and changed the trajectory of my treatment to get me back to the person that I knew I wanted to be.
Amen. I love your story because then it led you ultimately to then graduate from Harvard and do some traveling, which I found out later that that's what they do. After you graduate from Harvard, you go travel for a year. And luckily for us, you made the phone call, and I knew immediately that you were going to be absolutely perfect for the job that you blended into, and that was leading us through these new programming opportunities to work with every state and the MHSAA. So with that, how do you feel about your job? And now, tell us what you're doing now because you're only on contract with us.
Yeah. So thankfully, Christy is a very flexible and understanding boss, because I think I've changed my hours and my position about 3 different times since I started with the Mental Health Foundation. But my role now, besides being a speaker at our trainings that we do, talking about the Be Nice Action Plan, telling my story with athletic teams, with schools that we work with, kind of my main role now is to help produce and maintain those trainings that every coach in Michigan, along with some other states we work with, New Jersey, Virginia, and Alaska. So every coach, activity leader, whether that's in different states, whether that's, the leader of the drama club, the leader of the chess club, like they get these trainings that they can use to learn how they can better support their students' mental health or their athletes' mental health. So what we do at the Mental Health Foundation is design and implement these courses that look different every year. We update them for what's going on at the time, for what seems really pressing and approachable. And we talk about the action plan: notice, invite, challenge, empower. We talk about what signs and symptoms we can notice in the people that were around us, how to actually have those conversations that can be really challenging, but are really important. We talk about how to challenge stigma in those conversations, how to access those resources, just like the ones that I did in my story. And we talk about how to empower the people in our lives to protect their own mental health and make sure that they're taking care of themselves. So it's a self-paced training that we implement in all these states, and it's really impactful. We've gotten a lot of great feedback from the people who take our trainings that it's going to give them some tools to be able to have confidence to take action when it comes to someone who's facing a mental health change.
I love it. And the thing is, today on this episode, I was very fortunate to have someone who has experience working for the Mental Health Foundation and Be Nice. And with that, I feel I want to thank you, Derek, for your courage, your insights today. Your story reminds us all how powerful taking action can be. Derek is getting his master's degree in social work, so we are really hoping that he will remain with us at some point following graduation, even if it is from University of Michigan. But anyway, I want to thank everybody for listening to today's episode of Be Nice Podcast. Together, we busted a harmful myth and we learned from Derek's lived experience. We hope that by sharing these stories, this one in particular today about Derek, that we can continue to break down the stigma, that we can encourage you as a listener to notice, invite, challenge, and empower yourself and others when it comes to mental health. In today's episode, if it did resonate with you, if with someone who might need it. Don't forget, there is 24/7 help for those that you love. Text NICE to 741741. And also, always keep the number 988 in your phone to pass on to other folks that may be struggling. Until next time, be nice. It can save a life.